candidates who will actually stand out to the interviewers are those out of those 10 people that are in the room. Not everyone is going to be given a place. You want to make sure that you stand out. Don't prepare questions to ask that you can easily get an answer from through Google. That will just show that you're lazy. It will just show that you're really thinking about the question before you answer it. You're not just singing a list of praises for yourself. If you've come this far, then you can do this interview too. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Hiba and I'm a fourth year medical student studying at the University of Manchester. In this video, I'm going to be giving you 10 top tips on how to be successful in your medical school interview. If you follow all these tips at your interview, you're going to be highly likely to get a place at that university. Before I get started with the tips, I've made loads of videos about the medical school process, about medical school in general, so please make sure you watch those as well. From what I've heard, they've been really helpful to the people that have watched them. So tip number 1 is to not go unprepared to your interview. I've made a whole video giving you tips on how to actually prepare for your interview before your interview day. It's really in-depth, so I highly recommend you watch that. I'm not going to be going over those tips again in this video, but I just want to mention, make sure you're prepared before your interview. Don't go unprepared. Even though I'm sure you're an amazing person who's skilled and able to think on their feet, you are essentially competing with the other candidates that have come to interview, and you'll need to make sure that you're well prepared in order to stand out from everyone else. One thing I didn't say in that video, which I really do want to say in this video, is that make sure you also prepare questions to ask the interviewer. Normally at the end of an interview, the interviewer will ask you if you have any questions for them, and if you've actually thought of some questions to ask them, it really shows that you've had to think about their course, had to think about the curriculum, and that you've been researching and you want to find out more. Obviously, don't prepare questions to ask that you can easily get an answer from through Google, because that will just show that you're lazy. But think of something maybe a bit more obscure to ask that makes you look a little bit more keen about going to that university in particular. My next tip is that if there is a group task in your MMI, make sure you speak. Many interviews now, especially at universities that do PBL, will have a group task where there are around 9 or 10 people in the same room discussing a case or a particular topic whilst the interviewer assesses you. Remember that out of those 10 people that are in the room, not everyone is going to be given a place, and you want to make sure that you stand out and you're one of the people that does end up getting a place. So if you're in a group task, make sure you try and contribute, make sure you speak. You don't want to be the shy person that kind of sits in the corner and doesn't contribute and gets a bad score from the interviewer, but also make sure you don't talk too much so that you overtake the group and don't let anyone else get a word in. You want to have a good balance of both contributing in your group but also listening to the others in your group as well. Tip number 3 is to make sure you're polite and friendly in your interview. Whilst you're anxious and nervous and completely overwhelmed by the interview process and you have butterflies in your stomach, it's really easy for you to forget to be polite and warm and friendly. Like when you're in a stressful situation in your day-to-day life, your mood can be affected and you're not really as nice to everyone else as you would be if you weren't that stressed. In interviews, you may actually just forget to smile and be friendly. So just remember that you want to be warm and friendly. Just think about how you would want a doctor to talk to you if you were in a time of stress. How would you want a doctor to come and approach you? You'd want them to be welcoming and you'd want them to have a really open body language and open attitude. So just make sure you remember that, keep that in mind. If at any point throughout the interview day you feel like your mood is getting down a little bit, just smile, take a deep breath, make sure you stay positive and tell yourself that you can do it. Enter all of your stations with a smile and leave with a smile as well. The 4th tip is to back anything that you say up with evidence. All of the candidates who come to interview are essentially going to be trying to sell themselves to the interviewer and try and present themselves in a favourable light as they give their answers to all of the questions. The candidates who will actually stand out to the interviewers are those that will actually be able to back up what they say. For example, if you're talking about a particular skill, you want to give an example of when you've actually used that skill or how you've used that skill. Or if at some point in your interview you say you're well informed about a certain topic, then give some evidence of a book you've read that has allowed you to be well informed on that topic, or an article that you've read about it. Or maybe mention a part of your personal statement where you've talked a little bit about this. Giving examples and backing your claims up with evidence is what's really going to convince the interviewer that you are actually capable of what you're saying and you're not just singing a list of praises for yourself. Tip number 5 is really important, and that is don't let a bad station get you down. The fact that MMIs have different stations and different interviewers at each station is a huge benefit. When you're at your interview, please take advantage of this and don't defeat the purpose of having an MMI by letting one station or one bad question ruin all the rest of your interview. That literally defeats the purpose of having MMIs rather than a panel interview. so that you don't get down after just one bad question, and that you're able to start on a clean slate every single time you move on to a different station. If you have a bad station or you get something wrong, then remember that the next interviewer will know absolutely nothing about it. This is your chance to compensate for the mistake that you've made. So please take a deep breath, reset your mood, reset your mindset, come into a positive mindset, and believe that you can do better on the next station. Don't dwell on any mistakes that you've made in the interview, at least not until after you finish the whole MMI. The next tip is don't be afraid to ask for clarification during your interview. Don't be afraid to ask the examiner to repeat the question if you haven't really understood what they've asked you. Also, if you're confused or you just need a little bit of time to gather your thoughts together, don't be afraid to ask for a few moments for you to kind of put your thoughts together and wait a while before you actually answer the question. You can say something like, I'd just like a few seconds to put my thoughts together before I begin to answer the question, if that's okay. And that's completely fine. In fact, it will just show that you're really thinking about the question before you answer it. It's much better to do this than to blurt out an answer that isn't logical or coherent, or even worse, to blurt out an answer that doesn't even really answer the question. So just don't be afraid to take a moment to think about what is actually being asked. Tip number 7 is something that I know the admissions team at my medical school always says, and that is to treat the interview like a conversation. Honestly, the whole point of the interview is just to get to know you. So try and speak calmly and slowly as if you were just talking to a friend, or you've met someone new and you just want to tell them a little bit about yourself, or you want to share your opinion. Don't treat it like you're being interrogated. Try and approach the questions in a relaxed, calm manner as you would in a normal conversation. Tip number 8 is to be honest. If you haven't come across a certain topic before that they're asking you about in a question, just be honest and just verbalize the fact that you haven't read up on this particular subject before, but you'll try to the best of your ability to answer the question with what knowledge you already have. As I've mentioned in my videos, the interviewers are not expecting you to be experts. So if there is something that you haven't read about, then it doesn't matter, just tell them that you haven't read about it. That way they'll know that whatever answer you're giving is something that you're coming up with on the spot. If it's not 100% accurate, then they'll know why, which is much better than if you say you do know about a topic and then your answer doesn't end up really making any sense. They'll be able to see how you think on your feet as well. And at the end of the day, if that question doesn't go well, you've told them that you haven't really read up on that topic before, and you always have all of the other stations to make up for it. Also, be honest about any of the claims that you make in your applications or at the interview. So for example, if you say you play a certain instrument, or if you do a certain sport, they may well ask you more questions about it, and they may well ask you to elaborate on that. And if you don't actually play that instrument, or you don't really play that sport, it's going to be really obvious in your answer, and it's just going to look really bad. The 9th tip is to try and stay calm throughout your interview. I know this is easier said than done. I've been in that position myself. I know that interviews are really nerve-wracking, and nothing that anyone ever said to me really calmed me down. But I would say just try and take a deep breath whenever you feel yourself getting overwhelmed on the day of your interview. This is going to help you oxygenate your brain and just think logically. One tip I would give you is when you feel nervous, just try and think of how far you've come. Try and think of what you've done to get here, how many exams you've sat, how many GCSEs and A-levels you've achieved, how much volunteering you've done, how much preparation you've done. And this university has chosen you to come and interview for them. This university has asked you to interview because they feel that you are potentially capable of joining their institution. Just try and remember this and believe in yourself, and believe that if you've come this far, then you can do this interview too. Don't be afraid to keep some water with you throughout the interview to drink as well when you get nervous. The last tip is to make sure you dress appropriately for your interview. Usually in the invitation to interview, you will be given a kind of dress code on what they expect you to wear, especially with the majority of interviews being online now. It's really tempting for you to not dress up as smartly as you would as if you were going to actually interview in person. Just make sure you dress smartly, you're not in any inappropriate clothing. Also, if your interview is face-to-face, then often interviewers will say to avoid wearing any strong scents or smells. So that is something you should also try and avoid if your interview is face-to-face. But that is it for this video, guys. Those were my 10 top tips for your medical school interview. I really strongly believe that if you follow these interview tips, you're going to have a successful interview outcome. I'll also be uploading a video on tips specific to having online or virtual interviews. So make sure you subscribe to my channel so you can watch that one as well. Please can I ask that you like this video if you found it helpful? It really helps me out. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.